Good morning, everyone. So if John represents the big company perspective, I represent more of the small company perspective. Oops, this thing has a life of its own. So Recorded Future is a small company. We've been around for 4 years, 40 people. We're US-Swedish, so we have about 40 people in total, half in Sweden and half in the US. Contrary to many other companies, we actually develop everything in Europe and sell it primarily in the US. We do have European customers as well. Actually, UK Cabinet is one of our favorite customers. They're using our system to monitor threats around embassies and consulates relating to social unrest, disease outbreaks, natural disasters, things like that. And we have an intriguing set of investors, including these guys at Google Ventures. So we have some strange ties there. As we all know who are here, I mean, the interesting thing is really two things which I think have happened over the last decade or so. One is, of course, it used to be that information was scarce and to analyze it was extremely expensive. And two things have happened. We have all this information now we already heard about, and the cost to analyze has gone down tremendously. Thanks to Moore's law and a few other things, we can now handle much more data as a fraction of the previous cost. So about 4 or 5 years ago, we started thinking about other new areas where we could apply this shift. And we thought, well, kind of nice if we could help people avoid surprise and grasp new opportunities in some way. Our key insight, I think, was that no one, when analyzing text on the web, was, and when I say web, I mean web in the most general sense, everything from big media sites down to tweets. No one is analyzing time. Which seems like a waste because, of course, that allows us to take things from being just a timeless big cloud into something we can actually lineate out on a calendar timeline. If you go in, for example, on Google London this week, you'll probably find some old, very popular article about London published 8 years ago, which included the words this and week. Whereas we actually analyze the temporal content so that we can line things out. And interestingly enough, if you, coming back to the thing about recorded future, about 4 to 5% of what people write about time is actually related to the future. Given all the stuff people publish, 4 to 5% of that is quite a bit. Now that's future in the broadest sense, everything from I need to buy milk before lunch, which someone tweets, up to my favorite prediction saying it's going to rain more in the UK in 2080, just so you know. Another aspect which Chris mentioned earlier is that we've actually become much better at predicting the future. Weather forecasts, even though everyone still likes to joke about them, are tremendously much better now than they were only a decade ago, actually. At least when it comes to predicting 3, 4, 5 days into the future. Our cars now tell us when they need to go to the garage for service. We can see when the trains will be arriving, and we become, I would say, remarkably good at predicting, for example, election outcomes. And this is all these things are, of course, based on the same underlying idea that you have some kind of sensor, whether it's a thermometer or a particle sensor in your oil system or something like that, which senses the current state of the world. And then you've been able to build some kind of mathematical model to actually, based on the current state, predict future states. So we figured, let's take the same thing and apply it to the world and use humanity as the sensor. So that's what we're doing. We see the web as the humanity's way of sensing what's happening out in the world, both what's happening right now and also people's opinions, thoughts, fears about the future. So what we do is we harvest stuff out here, we analyze it, we go from unstructured text to structured data, and then we provide people the ability to analyze that either using a web interface or through an API where you can grab the raw data and apply your own clever algorithms and things like that to it. We do this at fairly large scale. It's still only a fraction of the web, but we currently harvest something like 250,000 pages on a daily basis. We extract things like which entities, people, places, technologies, whatever, the time dimension, as I mentioned, and the kind of events. So we have like 100 kinds of different events, everything from natural disasters to explosions to product releases, which are being talked about. And we put that into our index. And the delay from when something is published out on the web until it's analyzable interactively in our system is a question of minutes. I think the highest delay is something like 10 minutes, and that's mostly because some sites complain that you pull their RSS feeds too often, so you have to turn down the frequency on that. We also realized after first experimenting with doing this just in English and translating other languages into English, we realized we lost a lot in that. So we're actually now doing it in the source language in 8 different languages: English, Arabic, Chinese, simplified and traditional, Russian, Spanish, French, and Farsi. And we cover everything from big government sites, big media, all the way down to blogs and selected parts of social media. So we currently, I think we harvest maybe around 500,000 tweets per day, which is of course a small part, but we filter out a lot of nonsense, which we never would find anything interesting in. And this is what the kind of results we produce. So for example, up here, this one is to me the most intriguing actually. This is analysis we did. We used historic data to train a model which could be used to predict social unrest. So for example, protests out in the streets. And we apply that to news reports, both local and global, about Egypt. So here you have dates ranging this year from June 16 going forward. And for each date, we have, for the days going forward in 3-day intervals, the likelihood that there will be major social unrest in Egypt. And as you can see, already around June 16, we could say that around June 30 there would be unrest. Reason being that that was the anniversary of Morsi coming into power, and people were already a couple of weeks before starting to talk about the kind of protests they were planning. However, based on historical data, we could not at this time predict that there would be a continued unrest, because this seemed to be one of those anniversary celebrations which would then pass over and things would be back to normal. However, coming up around June 25, 26, 27, 28, you can see that the amount of noise about this was coming to a level where we could see, based on other historical precedents, that it was most likely that this would actually be something bigger than just a one-day protest. It was something that would involve into something else, which is pretty interesting. So still, of course, probabilities, but actually shows that you can, even in something fairly difficult, like, predicting crowd behavior, you can actually build predictive models which with some certainty predict interesting things. And we've applied this to other cases. For example, what happened in Libya on 9/11 2012, where there was similar kind of noise in historical data leading up to the shooting of the US ambassador. So I would say that with a system like ours, the security officer at the embassy there should have had better order on his things when things happened. We also use this to predict technology trends, seeing not only what's happening, but also which actors are important, who's talking and working with who. We look at cyber attacks. Who are the big actors planning cyber attacks in the future? What are the technologies they're using? Are they attached to different activist groups and things like that? A whole bunch of things. So then, how can we see this going forward? Well, let me first back up. I think, when we talk about text mining, and I think to me, search engines is the original text mining application, right? And I think everyone agrees that without search engines, the web is not a very interesting place, because we wouldn't be able to find a lot of interesting things out there. And when you actually look deep down, I think all publishers realize this. We've talked to some of our friends at Google about this question. They have some wonderful anecdotes. Like, for example, a Japanese newspaper who was publicly complaining about Google indexing their websites. And then Google contacted them and said, well, we can shut you down. We don't need to have you in our index. And they said, no, don't do that. We want the audience to come there. Similarly, in the US, I think, for example, Fox News, who, Murdoch has been constantly complaining about being indexed and having content stolen. They actually send content out to some search engines before they publish it, so that it will be readily indexed at the time they publish on the web. So in that sense, I think, even if people talk about restricting access to robots and search engines, in the end, in reality, they want the audience to come there. And I think that the next natural step is really to go from search to analysis. And I think in big part, this is a necessary evolution as the web grows. I think already today, if you look in some domains, it's virtually impossible. I think search engines are starting to come to the point where they are fairly useless, because there is so much content out there. People have become so good at manipulating the system that you actually need some more intelligence in the systems to aggregate data and present it in different ways. And that both create new value in terms of being able to provide these kind of services we do. It also enables people to be more critical towards media, I think, by not looking at a single opinion, but actually automatically finding others who have different opinions on a certain cause. So I think that can be very helpful in that sense as well. So I think, drivers, Moore's law, as I said, is still the underpinning, the fact that storage cost and commuting costs and so goes down is still driving the whole evolution, but also recent advances in linguistics, very clever paired algorithms and mathematics is helping. Of course, the exponential growth in content means that there's a lot more interesting stuff out there to mine. Twitter is a great source for us because that's, for example, being used by, say, hacktivists and so on to plan their campaigns. So you know, we have ridiculously good precision in predicting hacktivist campaigns thanks to being able to read most of the forums, I would say, where they actually plan their future activities. And if you look at the threats, I actually put IP protectionism and legislation down at the bottom. I think, to me, one of the bigger threats is really what Jonathan Zittrain wrote extremely well about in his book, The Future of the Internet and How to Stop It. The fact that we see, in many cases, content being not available on the open web, but turned into vertical silos, you know, appified, being put into closed applications where you can't, like we do, go in and harvest the content. I think there is more interesting stuff happening there in combination with things like deep web, data-driven sites, database-driven sites, and so on. And of course, the sort of more or less legal things like dark webs and so on. So I think those are maybe the more interesting drivers. I would agree with the previous speakers that this is probably a dead cause. Trying to prevent data from being out there in the wild is extremely hard, as I see it. So my point is that if you look at restricting the right to do text data mining or to have, you know, your robots out there analyzing, is virtually impossible. I don't see how anyone can actually draw a borderline between being able to read and being able to analyze anything. Even more ridiculous to a sense is, I think, trying to differentiate the rights between humans and machines for doing this. There is no way we are ever able to actually know whether it's a human or a machine sitting there doing the reading and the analyzing. So, you know, I felt a bit like Isaac Asimov here, that, you know, we need the same rights for the robots as we have for the human readers here. And actually, when I thought about that, you know, my final point here, I think that Alan Turing would have laughed that today we're seriously discussing whether we can disallow machines from doing the same kind of analysis reading a text that humans would do. You know, that means that we actually come a long way in computer science and linguistics. Thank you.